All right, what's going on, everybody? This is an article, Scientists Discover Trees Have a Heartbeat, from Friday, June 8th, 2018. Trees pump water from roots to leaves. Until now, scientists thought water moved through trees by osmosis in a somewhat continuous manner. Now they've discovered the trunks and branches of trees are actually contracting and expanding to pump water up from the roots to the leaves, similar to the way our hearts pump blood through our bodies. The only difference between our pulse and a tree's is much slower, beating once every 2 hours or so, and instead of regulating blood pressure, the heartbeat of a tree regulates water pressure. Andras Linsky of Aarhus University in the Netherlands told New Scientist, "We've discovered that most trees have regular periodic changes in shape synchronized across the whole plant, which imply periodic changes in water pressure." Trunk pumping motion. In his 2017 study, Zelinsky and his colleague Anders Barfod used terrestrial laser scanning to monitor 22 tree species to see how the shape of their canopies changed. The measurements were taken in greenhouses at night to rule out sun and wind as factors in the tree's movements. In several of the trees, branches moved up and down by about a centimeter or so every couple of hours. After studying the nocturnal tree activity, the researchers came up with a theory about what the movement means. They believe the motion is an indication that trees are pumping water up from their roots. It is, in essence, a type of heartbeat. Zelinsky and Barfod explained their theory in their newest study in the journal Plant Signaling and Behavior. Zelinsky told New Scientist, "In classical plant physiology, most transport processes are explained as constant flows with negligible fluctuation in time. No fluctuations with periods shorter than 24 hours are assumed or explained by current models." But the researchers still don't fully understand how the pumping motion works. They suggest maybe the trunk gently squeezes the water, pushing it upwards through the xylem, a system of tissue in the trunk whose main job is to transport water and nutrients from roots to shoots and leaves. Trees go to sleep at night. In 2016, Zelinsky and his team released another study demonstrating that birch trees go to sleep at night. The researchers believe the dropping of birch branches before dawn is caused by a decrease in the tree's internal water pressure. With no photosynthesis at night to drive the conversion of sunlight into simple sugars, trees are likely conserving energy by relaxing branches that would otherwise be angled towards the sun. These birch movements are circadian, following the day-night cycle. Their new discovery is something entirely different, they say, because the movements happen at much shorter intervals. Sooner or later, it's going to become obvious that everything is sentient. Our perception of this realm is only one version of sentience, one view of a larger awareness. A simple observation like this, discovering that trees have a sort of heartbeat. They have a pulse that is analogous to the pulse that is flowing through our own bodies via the movement of our blood, is transpiring in the trees in the same way via the movement of the water which sustains them. If you've ever been to the ocean and stood with your feet in the sand as the waves crash down and flow out into the land and onto your feet, you can get an idea about how the earth itself has its own pulse. It has its own frequency. And this really underscores the crucial importance of taking your shoes off and walking barefoot on the earth, no matter which part of it is, whether it's in a forest, in a field, or on the sand. By doing so, you are melding your awareness into the pulse of the earth. The pulse that is rippling through trees is no different than the pulse that is rippling through your body. It's all electromagnetic in nature. It's an energy field that is simply not perceivable consciously via the amount of dimensions that our sensory perception system decode. This is obviously why the system exists in the form that it does. I've mentioned this before in other places, but it is so very important that I think it's worth repeating. Roads, as we know them, were the first technology. This is how the virus, as it were, for lack of a better term, spread. Tearing up the land and building roads that are, by their very nature, disconnected from the larger environment that the land was previously a part of. And sure, it started as dirt roads, but it was always with the design that it would eventually become concrete, asphalt, and as the technology of roads improved from the perspective of the advancement, quote unquote, of civilization, you can trace the disconnection of human beings increasing as a corollary to that trend, to where you reach the stage that we're at now, where your average person doesn't spend any time at all on a daily basis with their actual body touching the earth. You are in a box called a house. You put shoes on with a rubber sole. I mean, there's a reason that the tires on the concrete are rubber as well, because they protect you from electricity. They protect you from electromagnetic surges, which is why they tell you that you're safe in a car during a lightning storm, because the rubber prevents your metal car from being conductive to the lightning chamber that is normally formed via the connection of the surface of the earth and the ionosphere, that electrostatic connection. And this is what forms the very basis of the Schumann resonances, is that electromagnetic electrostatic cavity between the surface of the earth and the ionosphere. This is why they tell you that you are safe in your car with your rubber tires. Well, look at what you've done to your body. Look at how all running shoes, quote unquote, which is what the majority of people wear in their daily lives, are rubber soled. Dress shoes are rubber soled. Everyone in their suit and tie uniform, women with their high-heeled rubber soles. We all walk around like the cars on the road with the rubber tires. We are no longer conductive in this state to the heartbeat of the earth. And then what do you do after you put your shoes on? Well, then you get in your car and you drive to your destinations every day. And these are likewise buildings that are built on top of the road technology. It's all built on top of concrete and asphalt. All of the buildings are made out of material that is derived originally from the earth, but it is turned into something that no longer has any resonance with the heartbeat, as it were. All of the buildings are climate controlled, so you have no connection to what is taking place in the normal environment. Your car is climate controlled. Now, I'm not making a judgment about whether it would be better to live in the dirt in a grass hut in another world, in another realm, in what we refer to as countries. Would that be better than the situation that we are in the Western world? Well, everything has its pros and cons. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like there aren't pros to what has been built here. After all, I would not be sitting here speaking to you through this device and this microphone if all of that had not been built in the first place. And yet, at the same time, one of the cons is that we would obviously have a greater connection to life if none of this had been constructed in the first place. But anyway, you can see why grounding, the idea of being out in nature, is the absolute most crucial thing that you can do for yourself. This was the main lesson that was attempted to be relayed to all of us regarding why we are all so disconnected from our natural design. Why we are all so disconnected from how the Creator designed us to perceive this realm and understand the place of our awareness within it. The intelligence that constructed civilization didn't think enough steps ahead, however smart it might be, in terms of IQ, to manipulate all of nature, to manipulate trees, to genetically alter them so that they were no longer connected, in the same way that they have genetically altered various animals and maybe even human beings along the way. And so this is the way to reconnect to your design, is to go out among things like trees that will increasingly be shown to be fully sentient, just in a different way than we are sentient. It's just a different scale of perception. And as an article like this shows, the trees have their own pulse. They are transmitting a frequency based on its connection to the Earth's natural frequency. And you can expose yourself to that frequency and bring yourself into resonance with the vibe that you are designed to oscillate around, the wavelength that you are designed to serve. And along those lines, I want to get into another article. Now, you're going to have to disregard the source here, because the source is Yale Environment 360. So this is an exercise and exercise in discernment. Excuse the weird way I said that. This has become a trend in these videos I'm doing in the summer. But anyway, so this is obviously going to be an article that is coming at this from the proverbial tree hugger perspective and the environmental propaganda that has been turned into a fake movement designed to siphon energy away from the true reality that everyone can see, that we are destroying the earth, destroying the habitat, which has nothing to do with the fabricated climate change narrative, though they use the sentiment that I'll be discussing here to embolden the false narrative about human-driven climate change. It's really about habitat destruction. And that goes right into what I was discussing about the way that trees and everything that's a part of the larger ecosystem is so mindlessly destroyed and used as the foundation for the materials that are then built on top of nature in a disconnected fashion from it. Are trees sentient beings? Certainly, says a German forester. In his best-selling book, The Hidden Life of Trees, Peter Wohleben argues that to save the world's forests, we must first recognize that trees are wonderful beings with innate adaptability, intelligence, and the capacity to communicate with and heal other trees. You write in your book, when I began my life as a forester, I knew as much about the hidden life of trees as a butcher knows about animals. Forestry students are taught how to harvest wood, what machines to use, how to sharpen the blade of a chainsaw, how to sell the timber, what price to expect. That's about it. As a young forester, I was told to make clear cuts, to use insecticides, and so on. I thought, wait, I am someone who wants to protect nature, and here I am being asked to destroy it. I visited some other districts that were operating in an eco-friendly way, and I thought, what? That's the way woods should be managed. I visited some other districts that were operating in an eco-friendly way, and I thought, that's the way woods should be managed. But the problem is I was still thinking of trees as a commodity, as something to sell, not as living beings. I had to learn from the people of the community where my forest is located how to take a closer look at trees, to see them as unique individuals. I also started reading the latest scientific research that began to present me with a new picture of trees as highly sensitive and social beings. Social beings. Well, we all learn in school that evolution advances by pitting each individual against every other in the struggle for survival. As a forester, I learned that trees are competitors that struggle against each other for light, for space. But we are now learning that individuals of a species are actually working together. They are cooperating with one another. Now, this really throws a wrench into the Darwinian evolutionary narrative, doesn't it? I mean, it's not difficult to manipulate someone when you provide them with the idea of survival of the fittest. This promotes behavior that is selfish at its core because at the end of the day, what does it matter? I'm the fittest if I can do this to another person or the environment or whatever it is. Which is why Darwinian evolution ties in so neatly with the atheist philosophy. They are one and the same at a root level, no pun intended, and it's funny to me how people say, like, no pun intended. I mean, I just realized that was kind of a pun, the roots and the trees, but it's a thing people say that makes them sound like they're intelligent in some way. What a silly little trend that is. And me, being a sheep, just repeating that phrase that people use, I'm doing the same thing. So let me just disregard what I just said there. But anyway, well, now I lost my train of thought. Oh, evolution and atheism, and I wanted to add on to that the nihilist philosophy. They're all interplaying with each other and reinforcing the philosophy inherent to every tentacle of those belief systems. How exactly do trees cooperate with one another? One thing is that mother trees suckle their children. They feed the young tree just enough sugars produced by its own photosynthesis to keep it from dying. Their root tips have highly sensitive brain-like structures that can distinguish whether the root that it encounters in the soil is its own root, the root of another species, or the roots of its own species. That's incredible. And that flies in the face of everything that they teach us from the time that we're little children. And of course, when you hear something like the sentence that I just read, just immediately, intuitively, you sit there and you say to yourself, of course it's like that. Why would it be any other way? Of course that's what's going on. The tree is a sentient being, and of course its roots, as its brain, as it were, are capable of distinguishing information in terms of what it is confronted with in its immediate environment. Of course that would be the way that it's done. If you were designing it, if you designed the tree as the thing that was providing the atmosphere for other creatures to breathe and sustain themselves on, well, of course those entities would be very intelligent and sentient and aware of what they are doing in this way. If it encounters its own kind, I don't know if scientists yet know how this happens, but we have measured with radioactive marked sugar molecules that there is a flow from healthy trees to sick trees so that they will have an equal measure of food and energy available. That is amazing as well, that the trees are actually taking care of the trees that are not doing as well as the really robust, healthy ones. How do the healthy trees that feed their sick companions benefit? If the sick trees die, they fall, which open gaps in the canopy. The climate becomes hotter and drier, and the environment becomes worse for the trees that remain. In the forest I manage, students from Aachen University did a study that shows that the parts of the forest that grew naturally were 3 degrees Celsius cooler than those that are managed and disturbed by humans. And incidentally, this is the exact same information that Victor Schauberger discovered when he was in the forestry department in Austria, Germany. He figured out the exact same thing. And that's how he discovered the information that he discovered about water, because he noticed the difference in the temperatures and just in general the flow of water in the natural undisturbed forest environment. This is where the epiphanies came from. The world is trying to limit warming from climate change to 2 degrees, but undisturbed forests can do even better than that. Forests create their own microclimate. When we thin forests, the temperature rises, the humidity goes down, evaporation increases, and all the trees begin to suffer. So trees have a stake in supporting one another to keep all members of the community healthy. You tell one amazing story in the book about trees keeping neighboring stumps alive. This one beech tree was cut 400 to 500 years ago by a charcoal maker, but the stump is still alive. We found green chlorophyll under the thick bark. The tree has no leaves to create sugars, so the only explanation is that it has been supported by neighboring trees for more than 4 centuries. I made this discovery myself and later learned that other foresters have observed this happening as well. Now imagine if we as human beings had the very same understanding of this realm and our place within it, and we behaved in a similar way to the way that these trees are behaving, where they are keeping a stump alive for hundreds of years at a time. That's incredible. That is the resonance of the earth. That is the frequency of the earth, that selfless understanding of the team that you're a part of, for lack of a better analogy, at this current moment. One part is only as strong as the whole. And yes, of course, I'm aware of how that sort of narrative has been co-opted by the philosophies of the disconnected system and turned into perverted notions labeled as communism and socialism. Yes, of course, I'm aware. But again, this is an exercise in discernment to take out little pieces of information that you then place in the larger understanding of what's really going on. And the beauty of that, when you do this, is it cannot be denied by the man-made philosophies of the system. They cannot compete with the energy of truth, you see. There is nothing that they can say to deconstruct everything that I've gone over so far in this video. It is immutable. It's undeniable. It cannot be messed with in any way. Are there other ways that trees help each other? We know that trees also exchange information. When one tree is attacked by insects, we can measure electrical signals that pass through the bark and into the roots, and from there into fungi networks in the soil that alert nearby trees of the danger. And there, that is what I was discussing about the web of information that is on the forest floor through the root systems of all the plants. The trees pay for this service by supplying the fungi with sugars from their photosynthesis, and the fungi in turn protect their host trees from attacks by other dangerous species of fungi and contamination by heavy metals. And this is interesting how this is contextualized, because you could make the same connection. You could construct an analogy or a metaphor to the way that our own bodies interact with bacteria and other entities on a microscopic level, especially the way that the bacteria interacts with our digestive systems. In a way, sure, we're supporting the existence of those bacteria, that fungus, everything that is in our bodies, and they benefit from that, but then at the same time, they also kind of protect our bodies from things that want to harm us because it would impact their own survival. And so there's this symbiosis, and I think in the health community, especially the alternative health space, there's this, especially as it relates to the idea of candida, and I'm not trying to discount that as a problem, but there's this view of bacteria and fungus in the body as parasitical. And you want to do all these cleanses to rid your body of these things. And yes, of course, all of that has its place, but you can take it too far, is my only point, to where you strip yourself of things that are beneficial to you. And this is, again, why certain people who don't have any of this in their mind and sort of create their own placebo effect, where they just don't let the idea come into their being that anything is going to hurt them, and they eat anything and everything. They put anything and everything into their bodies, and they live till an old age happy as can be, because they just have this mentality of, well, you know, what could possibly go wrong? It's not going to hurt me. And it's funny, you know, I actually work with somebody like that who, I made a comment to him one time that he was tilling something in a high tunnel, which is just essentially a greenhouse that you can grow things in the wintertime. It's a plastic domed thing, and he was tilling in there, and I said, hey man, you might want to wear a mask while you're in here tilling, because you're just throwing up all this dust into your lungs in a really concentrated way. And he just looked at me and he said, Steve, do you understand how much dirt has been in my lungs over my life? I've inhaled so much dirt. It's not going to hurt me. I'm not worried about it. And then he just went about his business. And, you know, I really appreciate that mentality, especially as someone who is looking into all of these health problems that we're facing as a collective race of beings, and how we are being intentionally assaulted with things that are detrimental to our symbiotic microbiome. That mentality is very beneficial to have exposure to and to have constant reminders of. Because, yes, as I've said before, the placebo effect is very real, and the mind is so powerful. And you can really create a condition for yourself if you're not careful. You can create, they do use this idea of orthorexia as a way to discredit the information that is coming out about the poisons and toxins that we're exposed to on a daily basis. But there is an element of truth to it, to where you can create your own disease by being so focused on every little thing that you put in your body and worry that it's going to do this, that, and the other thing to you. Well, if you kind of have a mentality of, I'm going to do the best that I can to avoid poison, but then at the same time, I'm going to understand that my body is incredibly powerful, and I'm going to have this mindset that I can deal with anything that comes my way. You have also written that trees remember their experiences. We had a heavy drought here. In subsequent years, the trees that had suffered through the drought consumed less water in the spring so that they had more available for the summer months. Trees make decisions. They can decide things. We can also say that a tree can learn, and it can remember a drought its whole life and act on that memory by being more cautious of its water usage. You've said that there are friendships between trees. What is the evidence for that? In about 1 in 50 cases, we see these special friendships between trees. Trees distinguish between one individual and another. That's incredible. They do not treat all other trees the same. Just today, I saw 2 old beeches standing next to each other. Each one was growing its branches turned away from the other rather than toward each other, as is more usually the case. In this way and others, tree friends take care of each other. This kind of partnership is well known to foresters. They know that if you see such a couple, they are really like a human couple. You have to chop down both if you chop one down, because the other will die anyway. Incredible. It's actually, incidentally, it's funny that I just read this, because I just saw this headline that Alice Cooper and his wife said the exact same thing, that when one of them goes, the other one's going, because they've been married for like 50 years or something like that, and they think one can't live without the other. And this is exactly what this forester is saying about how some of these trees behave. There is so much that we have not been taught about how this reality functions and how our perception operates, how our awareness functions within the realm that we are incarnated in and perceiving. There's so much that's been left out. And again, this is the takeaway from what I'm saying to you about how important it is to ground yourself and come into resonance with the pulse of the earth that the trees are expressing, and that they will so gladly bring into your own awareness. They will help you discharge the negative, quote unquote, energy that has built up in your body that is disconnecting you. They'll help you discharge that, and on top of that, they'll teach you. They will help your intuition function and give you insights, because as I was saying about the one tree stump, some of these trees have been alive for hundreds of years. Imagine the amount of information that they have acquired and that they possess, and being connected to the larger scalar mind, they have information about what has taken place that you don't have. And they can give it to you if you're open to it. It's amazing. This is the part of our reality that is so incredible and amazing, and that really pulls you out of the darkness that you can get sucked into. Whatever the case may be, I don't need to list them. You know what I'm talking about. I'm not even going to mention them to bring down what I'm talking about right now. You speak about trees as if they had personalities. Trees have just as much character as humans do. They also exercise independent judgments, which can differ. If trees lose their leaves too early, they may not produce enough food for a long winter. If they keep them on too long, they may get caught in an early snowstorm, and the weight of the snow can break their branches. Some trees of the same species and age living right next to each other shed their leaves weeks before their neighbors. I'm not sure why some choose to do this earlier and others later, but it shows that there really are differences of character that we can't easily account for. Incredible. You have been criticized for attributing emotions to trees. Scientists usually avoid such language. Well, of course, because the whole institution of science is designed to disconnect us from an understanding of what is really taking place. This was the whole Cartesian revolution, as it were, to characterize nature as a machine. That was the goal. Because there is no understanding of how that is impacting the larger climate ecosystem and just the ecosystem of the earth in general. We humans are emotional animals. We feel things, we don't just know the world intellectually. So I use words of emotion to connect with people's experience. Science often takes these words out, but then you have a language people can't relate to that they can't understand. That's one reason most scientific research has so little impact on people. If you only write technically about biochemical processes, people would quickly get bored and stop reading. We have been viewing nature like a machine. I swear I did not read this paragraph before I just brought that up. It's so funny how that happens when you do this. That is a pity because trees are badly misunderstood. How so? We just see them as oxygen producers, as timber producers, as creators of shade. I always ask people, who would think of, say, elephants in such terms? We don't look at elephants just as commodities or as mechanical and insentient objects. We recognize them as marvelous beings. On the other hand, nobody thinks about the inner life of trees, the feelings of these wonderful living beings. Plants are not generally thought to possess consciousness. We have this essentially arbitrary caste system for living beings. We say plants are the lowest caste, the pariahs because they don't have brains. Well, brains as we have them in that sense, right? But as he said earlier, they have through their root system their own quote-unquote brain. It's just different. It's a different scale of perception. Scalar perception is the key to understanding the reality of the situation that we are in. Or at least, it's what makes the most sense. Again, you have to use your intuition here. When you hear something and it just seems like it clicks and it's just this thing where you say, oh, of course it's that. Then that's the thread that you really want to follow and unravel. We say plants are the lowest caste, the pariahs, because they don't have brains. They don't move, they don't have big brown eyes. Flies and insects have eyes, so they are a bit higher, but not so high as monkeys and apes and so on. I want to remove trees from this caste system. This hierarchical ranking of living beings is totally unscientific. Now, that's a great point. It really is. All of this is totally contrary to the quote-unquote scientific method. I mean, that method is all about having questions and just saying, well, here's my question, and I have this sort of idea about what it might mean. That's my hypothesis. Now let's go investigate that. But when you have questions that aren't approved, then it's viewed as quote-unquote unscientific. Plants process information just as animals do, but for the most part they do this much more slowly. Is life in the slow lane worth less than life on the fast track? Perhaps we create these artificial barriers between humans and animals, between animals and plants, so that we can use them indiscriminately and without care, without considering the suffering that we are subjecting them to. How would understanding trees better change the way we manage forests? And this is where, of course, it gets into the environmental subject in a way where it can be used as sentiment to fuel the Club of Rome type agendas that are designed to form an international regulatory structure that will function as a quote-unquote new world order. Humans are weakening ecosystems by indiscriminately cutting timber. we destroy tree social structures, we destroy their ability to react to climate change. We end up with individuals that are in bad shape and susceptible to bark beetles, which can only infest trees that are already sick. Interesting, the analogy that can be drawn to human beings here. Are we only susceptible to this disconnection on an energetic level and to the outward manifestation of that disconnection, which often is physical illness, because we are already sick? Because from birth, we are having our genitals mutilated in the Western world. Is that not the first disconnection? The birth into a sterile environment with the harsh artificial lights of a hospital room? A sort of trauma from the beginning that disconnects us from our first breaths in this world. Do you think all of that's accidental? A tree that is healthy can get rid of them. So the beetle is winning because we have degraded ecosystems to the point where they are unable to respond effectively to threats. This is a perfect metaphor for what is going on with our bodies and our connection to the environment and the frequency of the earth and physical illness. Here in Germany, we have planted spruces to replace the beech trees. It is now too dry and warm for spruce, so those forests are failing in large parts of our country. It's because we have planted the wrong species for the climate. We need to let nature heal itself and come back to balance with broadleaf species that are natural to our region, like oaks and beeches, which will help to cool the forest down and can survive climate change without too much harm. Here's an interesting question. Do we need to manage forests at all? We are told that forests and woodlands need management, but it is just plantations that need management because they are unstable systems that can be destroyed by storms, by insects, by fire. And the analogy here is so perfect to farming, because that is what farming is. A farm is a plantation. It's an artificial structure that needs to be protected from the environment in the same way. And then you get into the same problems about pesticides and insecticides and dealing with disease and the whole thing. And so I hope you see how the farm is an artificial version of nature, in the same way that civilization, like I was getting into earlier, the technology of roads and buildings and that whole thing is an artificial version of life that we've been placed into. And so it needs to be protected in the same way that these artificial plantations need to be protected. But anyway, the rest of this is kind of just getting into the nuts and bolts of the forest management topic. Or, I mean, it looks like that. I actually didn't read down this far, so I might be missing a little nugget here or there that would be good to discuss, but oh well. You can check this article out on your own time if you like and see the end of it. But yeah, I just thought this was a really interesting thought experiment regarding trees. And, you know, it's funny, what pops in my head when I'm thinking of this is, you know, the scenes from The Lord of the Rings where the trees are actually a part of the world that Tolkien brought to life, and they are exactly as it's being depicted now by scientists, where they're intelligent, they have all of this accumulated awareness, they communicate with each other and support each other, and in many ways they are like people, even though you would be criticized for personifying trees as being sentient like animals are. I mean, it's so very evident that this is the nature of the situation that we are in. Everything is sentient on its own scale. And as a part of that difference in scale, there's differences in the passage of time. Life spans are shorter and longer based on that scale. And so we're looking at scales beneath us in terms of perception, but obviously as a part of this understanding, there are scales above us. And you can see how we might be in the situation that we are in when faced with a scale that would have the ability to perceive 5 dimensions or 6 dimensions as opposed to the 3 dimensions that our perception is limited to in our normal ordinary state. And my whole point of bringing all of this up is to again mention the crucial idea of putting yourself back into nature and exposing yourself to this energy and this intuition. It will help heal you if you do it enough. It will bring you into resonance with how creation designed you to function.